most of the times, especially when we have when we talk about the provision of services as desk offices, at the post office, when you meet the functionary who is there and you talk to him, most of the time this person is privileged towards a patent, a client, in terms of the fact that she or he knows the procedure, knows the procedures, knows better the laws, knows how to speed up the procedure, etc., etc. And you can only describe what you expect the institution to do, right? And as I said before, an ethical conduct, especially in this public sector, is a very pertinent question, because it needs to be internalized by a civil servant. It is something that one cannot assure through setting new laws or regulation. You need to find a person who really understands how ethical behavior of himself as a person translates to the functioning of an institution, which is a public institution. And this is why ethics and ethics in public management is a sort of a regulatory tool that we start to notice, and we start to believe it can be a very useful tool to perform, with which we can influence the effectiveness of the functioning of public institutions. And the stimulation of or introduction of ethics in ethics public management is performed through various channels. First of all, most of the countries have realized that trainings of supervisors, of the directors, and of civil servants, public functionaries, showing them what are the positive ethical behaviors, what are the desired ethical behaviors, would set examples from which the people can take their inspiration. Also, the introduction of internal standards. Some institutions do set their own code of conduct, code of ethical conduct, very internal documents, except of the documents that are there agreed on state level. But what is also very interesting and gains more and more importance is the leadership. We started to observe that the role of the leader is crucial in setting the standard of behavior of the public institution. So, as I said at the beginning, I will not go into details. I'll be very happy to answer your questions if you have ones, especially concerning practice. But what I would like to say as concluding remarks, though, are a few observations on the characteristics of code of ethics that I was mentioning at the beginning. So what flows from my research is that codes of ethics alone are not enough. What is needed, except of codes themselves, is the ethical infrastructure in which ethical principles and values can be applied. And what I mean by the ethical infrastructure is a whole and coherent system of laws, that's first of all, the procedures and the organs, the bodies that that would safeguard ethical principles. And the bodies and organs that have the powers to settle conflicts if they arise. So here I mean such institutions as ethical commissions, in case they're set up in public sector institutions, or for instance in Poland, the chief of public service has this power to safeguard ethical principles when it comes to regulation of the performance of civil servants according to an ethical code that we have. main characteristic of modern codes of ethics is that their placement in the system. So their role and relation with other acts of laws, labor code, criminal code, etc. Which means again that we are talking here about a whole and coherent system of laws, a system that is known also to beneficiaries, so not only to civil servants that are subordinate, that are subjects of those regulations, but also a system of laws that is known to citizens, so that we empower citizens by saying, by knowing how the system works, by knowing what are the standards of behavior, you can exercise your rights. The next thing, which is debatable, because it concerns the level of generality of principles contained in codes of ethics. And here, some experts believe that the principles contained therein should be general and universal, and they do not require specification because they must apply to various situations, life situations. And other experts believe that even though the principles should be general and universal, they need to be or should be described in the code of ethics in order to avoid misinterpretations and improper use. The other thing is sanctions. This is a question that is often raised. So should codes of ethics contain sanctions? Should they be treated as general guidelines depending on the will of principal or supervisor or a director that he or she would like to apply it in his or her institution? So are we talking here about soft law instruments, or are we treated the codes as precise expressions of statutory regulations? What is also being debated when it comes to application of the codes of ethics is whether the codes should contain a description of proper application of these guidelines, or should it be again left to the discretion of the organ that has the power to decide whether and to what extent this principle has been breached, has been infringed. And finally, the way in which codes of ethics are being designed and implemented is significant. So the main observation that comes at this point is that the more engaged the groups for whom the code is created, the more engaged this group is in drafting of the code, the more it is internalized and the more efficient it is. So that would be the end of the general remarks, and I'm very happy to hear the questions.
Thank you, Anna, for your lecture and your talk. I have, of course, some questions for the beginning, and also I'm inviting you, my dear participants, to think about the question for our today's guest. The first question would be, so you stressed somehow the practice you acquired during your research work in Poland. You said, you stressed education, ethical standards, leadership, sanctions. So what's your opinion? How you can, or do you think we can stress the standards in ethics or higher the ethical standards within the administration? Not just the public administration, but all the administration. Practically also the profit institutions are very important also in every economy. So my question is how with which approaches we can hire the ethical standards, and I would like from you to share with us your practical experiences in this field.
I go one by one? Or
yes,
yeah,
please.
okay. So ethical codes. I think they are a useful instrument, although I don't believe they are, and they should be, they should bear the characteristic of a regulatory status. So I'm not really convinced that the adoption of a code of ethics should be followed by sanctions.
But the code of ethics are the first step. The sanctions are at the end. We have quite a wide
spectrum of
yes,
activities, what happens in between, and that's the crucial point indeed. And how to higher the standards in public administration. I think the key point, the key tools that we have are first of all the trainings, and second of all the role of leaders, which is very crucial. So the trainings not only of civil servants, not only of people who perform actual work in public institutions, but also of their leaders, of the directors of the departments, of directors general, etc., etc. So the whole idea of being aware of what an ethical conduct is and how the administration works in terms of efficiency throughout fulfilling its task properly is already a success. But I think also it is, and it is an important step, as long as you have a state being aware that you need to provide the infrastructure for ethics and the training for within this area, this is already a big step. Without the conscious state action, you may not expect a public sector, which is a very wide sector, right? Because we're not talking here, as you asked me to think about civil servants. We are talking here about the doctors, the university teachers, the police, all of the public agencies, the post offices, municipalities, also local government. I mean, if you don't have a conscious state who is kind of giving a signal, we want you to start to think in your own environments what standards you should apply. So you should internalize it. Don't put the burden on me, on the state, but think yourself how you can improve your functioning. This is already a big step. And of course, it can be, well, people at institutions, let's call it this way, can find it a good opportunity to work on its efficiency. But then, on the other hand, as every change is somehow blocked by the unwillingness to provide for changes. So you should be aware. So the training is one thing. Now there are good examples of trainings and bad examples. From what we have, in Poland there is a group of researchers who went through the idea of how the code of ethics in Poland is drafted and how is the state really training its civil servants, because I have to be clear on that we only concentrate on public administration. How are public administrators trained in the understanding of modern administration and application of these rules and procedures? So, and again, the key lies in understanding that you cannot teach anybody ethical behavior. You can show a good example. You can make people think of what they can do, what they can internalize, accept, and develop in themselves. But you cannot teach them. This is why I was saying that you cannot certify that somebody is ethical, an ethical civil servant, right? And then, how to hire the standard, make your state aware, it is important, work on trainings, and the leadership, which really is something that, again, sets a good example. I mean, a conscious powerful tool or institution that sets the standard. And the conscious leader does not only show an example, but also stimulates his or her subordinates. We were discussing today an example of how you, if you provide at the end the sanction of misconduct of a functionary, what do you do? I mean, you can either hire a person, which is difficult, and it is also costly for the institution as well, because then you have to look for another person who is qualified, and it's a long process. And public offices do not have that time very often. You can cut the salary, but this is not the point. This is acting as a stick and carrot, and we started to realize that every carrot requires a stick, so you cannot grow your carrot until it is enormous, because then your stick will have to be enormous too big. So, and then comes the dignity management, right? So, through talking to people, through setting again a good example, this is how we can stimulate. So this is a very top-down process. But once you realize how powerful the structure is, and how powerful the leadership is, setting these examples, again, it's the first step to implement.
But giving or training the civil servants with the good examples are the one approach. Another one is maybe, or might be, the stimulating of virtues or values of civil servants on the other side. So the people should feel that they should act ethically, and from your perspective, which are the main ethical values or good values of civil servants? So not just putting them good examples. So you should not cheat, or you should be a good. You should serve your client, and you should be polite and so on. But on the other hand, which values do you think are the most important? This should be values for everybody, so not just for the civil servants.
I think there is one universal value that is shared most probably throughout public administration systems, public administration employees, which is an ethos. If you build an ethos of a public service, if you build an ethos of professional doctors, or an ethos of highly educated teachers, you make people believe they are working for something more than money. And this is when the dignity-based management comes in again. You
so
do not
to fulfill their expectation through their work, or
yes.
to act, the task should be done properly at the end.
Yes.
So
you show the wider perspective. I mean, in public administration, the wider perspective is common good, and it is very hard to explain it to people who enter the work in the public sector, to make them believe that they are really working for the country. Because in a daily work, you just don't see it. It is not a simple do it and it's done. You can't see the result. This is an ongoing process. So this is why by building an ethos of your public performance is something that most probably would keep the employees believing that there is a purpose of their work.
Okay. So besides ethos, or somehow executing the task properly, can we add on this list also the responsibility of civil servants? Because I can realize that although in Slovenia the situation is is funny. Civil servants are not prepared. They are prepared to use their power on one hand, and they are not prepared to take responsibility on the other hand. So, do you think that also somehow the ethical servants should be also responsible for what they work and how they work?
Yes, and I think I said it in my speech before that public administration employees find themselves in this threshold when they are given power, but they need to realize that they are executing a very serious authority, the authority of the state, and they have to be responsible for the decisions. Well, of course, it is regulated on a statutory level as labor law codes or penal codes, etc., etc. I mean, you can execute the responsibility of a civil servant if he or she misconducts, doesn't behave well, or if she or he accepts a corruption or a payment for performing such duty. Of course, you can put the hard sanction there.
And one of my last questions, somehow you stressed so the public servants should